Welcome back to the Irish Writers' Weekend, supported by Culture Ireland, the Embassy of Ireland in London, and the Doyle Collection Hotel Group. The British Library has asked me to say a few words to introduce the next session. My name is Sinead Mackay, and I'm the Executive Director of Literature Ireland. And for those of you that haven't heard of Literature Ireland, our role is the promotion of Irish literature abroad. Not a very difficult task. We support literature primarily in translation and have supported approximately 2,500 works of Irish literature in 59 languages. Next year, we'll be 30 years old. I'd like to thank the British Library for the invitation to accompany you at this evening's event. The next session is called Amnesiac, Neil Jordan in Conversation with Fintan O'Toole. Unfortunately, Fintan's flight was cancelled at short notice due to the stormy weather conditions, and he was unable to change to another that would have got him here on time. But we are very pleased that he will be able to join us here on screen, and I'll be joining Neil on stage to help facilitate the conversation. I don't think they'll need much help. I'm sure you're well aware of the incredible work and achievements of our speakers. Neil Jordan is one of Ireland's most acclaimed film directors, the creator of Angel, the Academy Award-winning The Crying Game, which I remember being spellbound by over 30 years ago. Michael Collins, The Butcher Boy, and Interview with a Vampire. In recent years, he has become one of its most appreciated writers, publishing a series of novels and now an incredible autobiography, Amnesiac. In fact, he's been writing all along. I think in recent years, perhaps there's been more acclaim attached to his work, but he's been writing from the very beginning. Fintan O'Toole is a renowned journalist and the best-selling author of We Don't Know Ourselves, A Personal History of Ireland Since 1958, Heroic Failure, Ship of Fools, A Traitor's Kiss, White Savage, and other acclaimed books. He's a columnist for the Irish Times and advising editor of the New York Review of Books. Please do welcome Neil to the stage, and hello also to Fintan.
Hi. Thank you. Hi, Fintan.
Hi, Neil.
Okay. Whoa. How strange. I can see you there, and you guys can see him, and you can see me. Yeah. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to be there, missing all the fun. Strange events with cancellations of flights this morning. So anyway, it's really good to be with you, and thank goodness for contemporary technology that we can still do this lovely event. Neil, the memoir is it's an absolutely wonderful work of art in itself.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I suppose the obvious place to start, though, is with the maybe typical title of yours, that it's a memoir which, in its title, invokes the idea of forgetting, and yeah. I wonder why you chose that title, and why, particularly in the early chapters, you're kind of playing with this idea of what you remember and what you don't remember, and whether things you think you remember are real or not.
Well, it's the reason for the title is very simple. I went on Google and I wrote in Amnesiac, and there didn't seem to be another book called that. It's the honest to God truth. And I thought, okay, that'll be an appropriate thing, because my mother was a painter, and she spent her whole life documenting the landscapes around us. I was born in Ross's Point in Sligo. I grew up in Clontarf, Dollymount, really. And so it was impossible to separate my memories from the pictures that she had painted, And, you look at your early childhood memories, and people show you photographs of even yourself as a horrendous little mewling brat or an adorable child, however you want to think of yourself, And in my case, I'd look at photographs of the landscapes around Ross's Point and paintings she had made of them. And I found it impossible to separate my own memory from both her pictures and stories I've been told, really, And her father, in turn, was he taught painting. It sounds very grand, doesn't it? But they were kind of not very grand painters. It was just what they did. And he lived in Bray, and I remember I never met him because he had died by the time I was born. But his wife was alive, my grandmother. She's very old, and they lived in this kind of house out in Bray, and there was a staircase in it. And when we grew up, a staircase was a magical thing, because for some reason we didn't have one in the first place we were. But he had painted all these murals up along the wall, up along the staircase, So I basically realized I find it almost impossible to separate my own memories of childhood from these images, and that's why I thought that it was an appropriate title in the end. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating when your first novel, I mean, you wrote that brilliant collection of short stories, which I remember reading when they came out, Night in Tunisia, and being taken aback just how accomplished they were. But I think the first novel is called The Past, and it's a sort of, I think you mentioned in Amnesiac that the early parts of this memoir are a kind of almost parallel version of that novel. But it's fascinating. I was just looking back at it. I mean, how much that novel is organized again through pictures.
Well, it's organized around the idea of a photographer. Because this is like really arcane and personal. But his father, in turn, was a photographer. He was from Cornwall, and there's all these mysteries about one's background. This is why, my grandfather's name was O'Brien, but he came from England, and for some reason he turned up around he probably was trying to avoid conscription in the First World War, or maybe he was a conscientious objector, or maybe perhaps he was a sympathetic nationalist, and maybe he hid a gun in his little painting case or something. I don't know, but his father in turn was a photographer from Cornwall, And I suppose when I wrote that novel, The Past, I think it's a really tangled book. I'm surprised you even remember it, I mean, it's a really complicated piece of work, isn't it? I would say the kind of visual kind of elaboration of the novel is far more to the forefront than any sense of narrative, isn't it, really? But, it was about, it was about what photography implies, and the novel itself proceeded from a series of photographic images and then attempted to bring them to life, But that's been my background, really, And so when I was asked to write this memoir, I wasn't even sure I was interested in writing a memoir, because nobody thinks their life is that interesting, do they, really? But, I began with the opening section was visiting my mother in hospital and driving her to Mornington, Bettystown, Laytown, that landscape, and we had a cup of coffee in this little place, and she said, "Oh, I was born here." I was actually stunned. I had no idea. I was saying, "Mother, why didn't you tell me this before?" Because I knew that there was a little post office, but I think memory is like that. People reveal what they want when they want, don't they? And also, they don't always tell the truth. I think very few people tell the truth about themselves, So this memoir is an attempt to once more occlude the truth about myself, which I myself haven't got a clue what it is,
Did you find something of the opposite as well? I know, when I was writing my own thing, which is not really a memoir, I called it a personal history, but I was using kind of personal memory as a way to try to write a bit about just what it was like to live in Ireland, over periods that we both shared. But I know I found some of the things that I thought would make really good stories, when I started examining them, and I completely remember them as having happened, but they couldn't have happened. Did you have any of that same?
Well, your memoir is different, Fintan, because you do trace your own birth and your own memories through the various social changes that were happening in Ireland, and you do brilliantly, I have to say. I was just revisiting it last night, and it's kind of a personal, exegesis of the Irish experience from the 1958. You said you were born. I was born in 1950. From that period onwards, and I found it remarkable that so much stuff I'd forgotten was there. But I have to say, most of that stuff, as I grew up through it, I wanted to forget it anyway. Do you understand what I mean? And I think, I suppose when I was writing this, I realized how much of a sense of escape there was in my own experience, how much the various things I did were an attempt to escape the environment I grew up in, and to escape. I've no I've no particular beef with Ireland of the 50s or 60s. You know, I found it quite innocent and quite weird, you know what I mean? But I didn't hate it, you know, and but I do realize that most of the choices I've made in my life were in attempts to escape this kind of doom that that period seemed to want to inflict upon us, you know.
One of the things you say in the book, and it comes up a couple of times, I suppose it's really just a kind of reflection of your own sense of your own psychology, your own what makes you who you are. But you say of yourself, you say you always looked on your experiences as if they were someone else's, and that sense of standing outside yourself and kind of almost watching yourself is very, very powerfully captured, particularly in those early chapters. And do you think that's part of?
Well, I think that's the curse. I think that's the curse of being a writer in a way, you know, because it's almost like a curse. It's almost like an existential curse in a way. You know, you realize you're looking at yourself doing something, and you say, "Now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that." You know, now I'm kind of, I don't know, walking among the fallen leaves that outside the British Museum, and you realize your own awareness of the experience you're going through is as strong as the experience itself. You know, and I suppose the question is who experiences, or do you experience anything in a way, you know? But I mean, I think anybody who decides to fictionalize or is there a word, narrativize, is that a word? But
there is now.
Well, yeah, but anybody who tries to dramatize their own experience is immediately outside of experience, which is a kind of curse in a way, you know? I mean, I do remember my first wife, Vivian, when we would be sitting by a beach, it used to drive her insane that the experience that I would be thinking and processing in my own mind was a blockage to the experience itself. Do you understand what I mean? And it's a strange, that's just a strange thing. But when you're asked to write a memoir, as I was by the publisher, Neil Belton, you know, I initially didn't.
Who's also my publisher and editor, by the way, as well. So he has he has a stake in both of us.
Yeah. Well, actually, Neil attended my school.
Yeah.
St. Paul's, Raheny, apparently. Yeah, I don't remember him that well. But anyway, it's. I suppose it's a worthy theme to examine, isn't it? When you're asked to write a memoir, you know, what is the act of memory? You know, does it interfere with the? They use a phrase now in literature or in journalism mainly, lived experience. It drives me insane. I mean, what other kind of experience is there except the one that you have lived, you know? But I suppose there is the described experience by others, isn't there? Is that why they use that as a distinction now?
Well, I think it's interesting that phrase has kind of bubbled up when we're in a kind of such a digital world, or so many people are kind of living online, you know, and so what the line between experience and living, I think, is perhaps. I mean, I share your annoyance that it is a kind of cliche, but it sort of seems somehow telling that we need to.
Okay, so we're all cursed now with this narrative. We're all cursed with this narrative glitch, are we? Yeah. We're all observing ourselves, experiencing different events, and describing them to ourselves as we experience them. And, well, we are. You know,
it's like the word curation. You know, I think when we were younger, I mean, you know, to curate was a very specialized kind of word that only really kind of applied to, you know, art history or whatever. And now, you know, people use it all the time. It's like they curate their own lives online. So there is something happening with memory, I think, and a gap between living and remembering, or living and representing. You know.
But I can't remember something or actually go through the description of writing about it, if I'm asked to write about memory, without feeling a certain sense of loss. Do you understand what I mean? Without feeling a certain, what's that word, ennui, is it? Or without feeling a certain sense of loss is the word, in a way. Because I suppose the past is always implies that change doesn't happen in a way. Do you understand what I mean? And I don't know what I'm talking about here, really. But I mean, when I was asked to describe the Dublin of my childhood, When I began to do it, I actually thought it was quite beautiful in a strange way, That city that I remember from say, 1955, it still hadn't been, it was still a Georgian, kind of Victorian, empty, brown, kind of fawn-bricked pile, And when I begin to write about it, what strikes me really is, A, how unchanged it was since the Dublin Joyce described in Dubliners, or in Ulysses, and B, how actually kind it was, or how oddly lovely it was. Do you understand what I mean? I don't mean to be waxing lyrical here, but the physical beauty, the physical aspect of the city I grew up in was rather special, I think, And
a wonderful scale to it, I think, just a kind of perfect human scale, both the buildings, the streetscapes.
And the North Strand, those a few German bombs had fallen in the North Strand, we used to walk past it trying to go into the cinema in the capital and all that, It was always, it was weird. It was interesting,
Yeah.
But,
I thought it was a very telling little thing you say, but your father was a mathematician, and maths was obviously a big interest of his, and how you say you were completely useless at mathematics and brilliant at geometry.
Well,
I think that's really interesting.
I was useless. I was useless. My father, he was what they call a Kigara. Do you know what a Kigara? Anyone knows a Kigara?
Yeah.
A school inspector. Okay. He was a teacher before that, yeah. And so he taught all the teachers that taught me, and they kind of lived in terror of his disapproval. I don't know, there was nothing like that going on, but he wrote all the math books. If you studied maths, remember those Fallon's books, those Fallon's maths books? He wrote them, okay. And he designed the maths curriculum, what they used to call the new maths, that came in with the new curriculum around the 60s or some period like that. And my brother was kind of a maths genius, yeah. And I was utterly useless at it. I fundamentally didn't understand it, and in particular I didn't understand algebra. A plus B equals A plus B. A multiplied by B equals AB. What does that mean? I really didn't understand it until he said to me once, oh, A represents a number and B represents another number. I went, nobody told me that. Why didn't they tell me that? It would have made life so much simpler. Do you understand what I mean? But for some reason, I was good at geometry because I could picture all the things, and I did fail miserably in an examination in maths, and I shone in geometry, and the teacher thought I immediately copied, But I had to say to him, well, who else got the mark that I got in geometry? Nobody else did. So who could I have copied from? Which kind of, he whacked me anyway, but it was just a thing. I could understand the geometric kind of logic of shapes that I could see, but I couldn't understand the abstraction of mathematics, But I love maths now. I love it, the idea of it, I just wish I was better at it. Mm-hmm.
But is that visual imagination that just seems to have kind of imprinted itself on you? That's.
I don't know really, but it's. I could just understand it because I could see it. Maybe it is a visual thing, yeah. And I suppose everybody does say to me, well, why did you move from writing short stories and writing a novel into making picked movies, It was because I suppose I saw things very clearly. And when I published that novel, The Past, somebody did say to me, I don't know if you remember that time, but we would all go up to Belfast to do readings, to read in front of these very severe northern kind of intellectuals like James Hewitt and people like that, and they always seem to have come from a more kind of sophisticated and cultured environment than we had to endure down in Dublin, and I think one of them said, do you think it's appropriate do you think visual description is appropriate to the form of the novel or the short story, And I thought it was an interesting question because most of what I was writing at the time was kind of immense kind of sagas of visual description, That's not the reason I started to make movies, but maybe I could just see things clearly, And when I began to make films, it became a different way of talking about the world that I had experienced, or that I was experiencing, you know.
Yeah. I mean, there's a thing you say in the book, which I find absolutely fascinating, which is you say, you said, I would write fiction about everything but the present, but I could write the present in film scripts.
Okay,
so it's not just this visual verbal thing.
That's hard to explain, I know,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think Night in Tunisia was published in 1976, and I think The Past was published in about 1980. At the time, and I played in a band, to make money. Basically, I used to play the saxophone and in this touring band that used to go up to Belfast and Derry and, you know, go across the border in the most kind of horrendous time of sectarian killings and all that sort of stuff, And I wrote two film scripts, one which is made by Joe Comerford, not me, and the first film I made was called Angel. And for some reason, I could write with an ease for the cinema, do you understand? And I could introduce themes and, you know, elements of violence and what seemed to be happening in the country around us, you know. But I never would have addressed that in prose, and it must be just a psychological quirk of my own, really. But that's why I found the idea of cinema a kind of liberation in a way, you know, and why it gave me, gave me a kick in the pants and propelled me into all sorts of other things, really, you know. But I was lucky, I think, really, that I found my way into two different modes of expression, really, you know. But it was a total accident, Fintan, really. But I mean, it did provide me with a way of talking about things and issues that I never would have written about as fiction, you know.
And is that to do with the way you write fiction? That I suppose also the way you make movies. I mean, you're not interested in realism in any narrow sense. I mean, I think what gives your work in both media its distinctive character is this, how much the reality you represent is informed by the imagination, right? There's not a clear distinction between one and the other. I think
it's the difference between solipsism and kind of, you know, engagement with a brighter world, really, you know. I mean, take that story, Night in Tunisia. It was about my own experience with my own father, But yet, I turned this rather austere academic Kigara into a guy who played saxophone in a vanishing world of show bands, you know, who was trying to teach his kid to relish the kind of music and the kind of musical kind of language that he had loved all his life, you know, and the kid refuses to accept it. And I do describe in Amnesiac, the memoir, how the story that I could have told was when my father used to bring me to the St. Francis Xavier Hall in Dublin, at the end of Dorset Street, to listen to the Irish Symphony Orchestra, you know, because there was a big musical culture in Dublin at the time of classical music, you know, and we used to go together and we used to love it and blah, blah, blah. It was a big contact point between a father and a son. And at a certain point, I think it was his birthday. I don't know if I wrote this in the memoir. And I bought him a piece of vinyl, And it was a version of Moon River by a singer called Danny Williams, not Andy Williams. Andy Williams also did a version. Andy Williams was the white crooner. Danny Williams was a kind of a Sam Cooke of an earlier generation. You know? And he said to me, "You bought this for yourself, didn't you?" And I said, "No, I bought a few," or whatever. But he presumed, and he got angry at the fact that I bought this disc. As a result of which, I never took the invitation to go to the Francis Xavier Hall to listen to Debussy and Schubert or whatever the stuff we used to listen to at the time, you know. And that's the kind of little familial kind of drama about which I wrote that first story. Do you understand what I mean? But I never would have written it in that form. And I don't know why I'm saying this, but it's just an example of what the imagination does to one's own experience, I think, you know. I think really you use stories and you use avatars of oneself to release things that you cannot speak about in the first person. You know, if you talk to a child and they seem to be troubled by something and they can't talk about it, and you say, well, Johnny down the road, you know, fell and he broke his ankle and he was very sad and blah, blah, blah. And if they talk about Johnny, then they can talk about themselves. If they talk about, say their name is Paddy, if they talk about Paddy, they can't talk about themselves. But if they objectify the experience, it allows them to, you know, to actually talk about things. Mm-hmm. Am I making sense? I hope I am.
Absolutely. There's an extraordinary story which I found intensely moving in the book, which really goes back to you were involved in a company called the Children's Tea Company, which was sort of a experimental street theatre, children's theatre company in Dublin at the time with the Sheridan brothers and people like that. And you tell a story which is both sort of very moving in itself, but also kind of very telling about this relationship between the real and the unreal, about a production that you did on Dollyman Strand, on the beach, using a kind of a Yeats play extended story. And so you have the blind man and the lame man and the saint. And the kid who likes dressing up in the costumes of the girls' costumes. Could you just maybe tell that? Because
Shall I tell it? Okay. Well, we had a theatre group, Jim Sheridan, a very great director, actually, the best director of actors I've ever come across, I have to say. Yeah? He was a friend of mine. We started out together. He had a theatre group, various theatre groups, and I joined the theatre group. And I used to write stuff, and we set up this kind of children's come street, come agitprop theatre group, and we used to take kids from what they called the inner city. Do you remember the inner city? And, you know, as, you know, good kind of socially conscious but university educated dudes, you know, we'd invent these theatrical kind of experiences. And we took a load of kids out to Dollyman Strand, and I had the idea of using Yeats's play, The Cat and the Moon, which is about a blind man and a lame man meeting a saint who will cure them both. It's kind of a story that Synge told, you know, in the Well of the Saints. It's a well-known kind of trope of Irish folk kind of literature and folk memory. And the saint then cures the blind man and cures the lame man, and it has various consequences. So there was an actor called Fergus Cronin who played the blind guy, and there was somebody else who played the lame guy. I don't remember who that was. And we had all these clothes in various packages, and the kids could involve themselves in a day-long experience with this story. And the actor who was playing the blind man was so convincing to the children that he would say, "Where are we?" And they'd say, "We're by the sea." He'd say, "Well, what's the sea?" They say, "It's over there." He says, "Where's over there?" He'd have to turn this way and that way. And he said, "And what's it like?" They say, "It's blue." He'd say, "What's blue?" So he got them thinking about the idea of thought, of sight and colour and everything that sight implies, you know. And I think he was so convincing that by the end, he led the kids through the dunes, where another actor called Garrett Keogh was sitting like a Beckettian figure in a rubbish bin, yeah. And he emerges and he makes Fergus, who was playing. Am I boring you? Sorry, is it going on too long? Who was playing the blind figure? He makes him see. So Fergus turns around and he suddenly pretends to see all these kids he's been with for perhaps 4 or 5 hours. Yeah. Is that what you look, Johnny? Oh, you're a girl. I didn't know you. All that sort of stuff. Your hair's red. Okay, what is this red? And so the kids were so convinced by this. And then it was over, and there was a bus, and we were all going back, putting the kids back in the bus. And there was one little kid who, for the whole evening or the whole afternoon, had kept everybody entertained. And there were clothes they could dress up in, like an old trench coat, a dress, a headgear, this kind of. But this kid always chose the girls' clothes. And he was a natural entertainer. He was extraordinarily entertaining. He kept all of these kids as entertained as the show we were putting on did. And as we were going, we hear him praying to Garrett, who's still stuck in this rubbish bin. He's saying, "Dear Saint, please, look, I know I'm going to go home, and my father's going to beat the head off me because he thinks I'm a girl, you know? And he always wanted a boy. This boy was very effeminate, yeah. And he says, he says to the saint, I don't want you to do it now. You don't have to do it now, but I want you to do it when I go home and when I go to sleep. I want you to turn me into a girl. So I'll wake up in the morning and I'll be a girl and my dad will understand what's going on and he won't ever beat me again." Okay, that was basically the story. And it was utterly heartbreaking, actually. And poor Garrett, who was playing the saint, had to say, "Look, I'm not really a saint. I can't really make these miracles happen. This was just a play. The kid refused to believe it, you know." And this drama went on. This dilemma went on as the light went down, and eventually we had to bring the kid back into the bus. And but I mean, it was at a period where there was no therapeutic options that even us as socially conscious theatre makers, let's call ourselves that for the moment, could even access, you know, to help this boy. But it was a very, I've never forgotten it, and I doubt anybody else, any of the other actors who were involved in the event have forgotten it either. But
extraordinary
strange.
moments, magically told in the memoir. But one of the things that really struck me about it is the sort of the need for belief, the need for miracle, you know, which is also there in your work, you know, that you're writing through a period when, in a sense, the religious consciousness is receding in Ireland and elsewhere, you know, and there's no sense of nostalgia about it, or you don't think you're looking to go back there, but that sense of the possibilities of the miraculous or of the wonderful, I'm trying to keep that alive somehow.
I wouldn't call it miraculous. I just call it more kind of numinous or unseen, you know. I mean, basically, I think we grew up in a highly superstitious culture, you know. I think we did, and it's only when I left Ireland, came to Britain, you know, I realised that a rational world is possible, really, because, I mean, the world I grew up in was irrational from start to finish. There was nothing rational about it, you know. You know, there was an unfinished, apparently, revolution. There was teachers who would rant and rail at, you know, the kind of oppression of British history. I remember that when I was in St. Paul's in Raheny. This history teacher was furious at various, I don't know. I always remember the phrase, he says, "The only Englishman who has ever became Pope." Was that Adrian, the something or other? Was it?
Yes.
You go, why?
Nicholas
Why is this man so angry?
Adrian, Pope Adrian, yeah.
Why is all this so strange? And, you know, why do they have loudspeakers? Why is there a thing called Corpus Christi? You know, why do people go in and out of church and pray for souls and release souls from purgatory? And what the hell is purgatory? It was all this stuff, you know. Very strange. It was very strange. When I began to go to, you know, around Eastern Europe looking for locations and all that, and I saw these recently kind of, you know, you'd go to Romania, you'd go to Hungary, you'd go to areas of East Germany, you know, that were under the, you know, basically Stalinist rule, I suppose. I would get the same sense from people there of this release from an absolutely irrational reality that in some self-punishing way they missed, you know. It was strange, really. And I think we grew up in a very strange country but certainties are very comforting to children, aren't they, really, you know? And when they're removed, they have to realize they're not children any longer, you know. And but it was, you know, we've had a strange experience, you know. But I do worry that that there's so much concentration on the past in our Irish present, you know, that itself is a bit damaging, but strangely damaging, you know, because, I mean, it wasn't hard to object to what was going on then, you know. You know, you could write a book about it. You could write a play. Myself and Jim wrote a play about the industrial schools, you know, and you know, about Artane. And in that, it wasn't a very good play, but it did expose the realities of what was going on there. You know, the physical and even the sexual abuse that was going on there at the time. But it was possible to write about it then, but for some reason people didn't, and I don't understand. You know. I genuinely don't understand.
Or if you did, people didn't pay any attention. I mean, you had that play when Mannix Flynn wrote about it, but there's kind of still an ability somehow not to know the stuff, you know, which
perhaps there was an attachment to old realities that you know, people needed or still wanted, you know.
Yeah. Can I ask you? You use a wonderful phrase in the book, which really kind of captures, I suppose, filmmaking, which you said is the thrill of taking a real world apart and replacing it with an imagined one. And I don't know if this is fair, but it seems to me that you could do that as a filmmaker with Ireland, and you could do it with England, with London, you know, with Brighton, whatever. You could, you know, but not with America. You know, that you and I think it's very clear from the book, the way you write about it, you were never happy in Hollywood, for example. You're never happy with that.
No, I was not unhappy in Hollywood. It was I had an enormous amount of fun in Hollywood. It's just they never really wanted to do what I wanted to do, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, when I did go to Hollywood, it's a very welcoming place. They say, we love you, we love your work. I say, okay, will you do this? They go, no, we don't want to do that. Why don't you do this? It's as simple as that, really, you know? And I don't think that aspect of Hollywood has changed at all, really, you know? I mean, there was a journey that every European, British, Italian, Irish filmmaker would make to Hollywood. I do remember meeting a guy called George Schleiser. Did you ever see a movie called, what was it called now? The Vanishing. Did you ever see The Vanishing?
Oh, yeah.
A Dutch movie. One of the great constructions of terror I've ever seen in my entire life, okay? And I met George in Hollywood. And he was remaking his own film for a Hollywood studio. And he was changing the ending. I mean, the great thing about The Vanishing was there was no release whatsoever. The guy ended up buried alive, and the family above are still having the thing. And he's taken the red pill or the blue or something. I don't know what he took. He took one journey. And George was remaking his movie. He was changing the ending. And I said, George, why are you doing this? And he said, I want to experience the beast once in my life. I went, okay, I get it. I mean, it's an irresistible attraction, I think, to, you know, to a European imagination, you know, to actually be where they do this as a matter of course for a living, which at the time when I went there was Hollywood, you know, and also to think that, you know, you'll have all the tools of the train set at your disposal, and perhaps you can master and express yourself through this. Through their box of tricks, really, but it very rarely works, you know.
I remember at the time when Angel came out, you know, the sheer wonder that there was a fella around town whose books we had been reading, and you know, we'd have seen you around the place and knew people who knew you, was actually making a movie in Ireland. You know, it was just in itself a kind of wonder. And there was all sorts of nonsense about that, you know, and you write about this with poor John Boorman, who gets caught in the middle of this controversy.
Yeah.
As if you couldn't make a film in Ireland without everybody else hating you for the fact that you were doing it.
But you've done it, yeah.
But if you look back now, Neil, I mean, there is such a thing as Irish movie making. There is an Irish cinematic tradition.
Yeah.
And do you recognise? Is there anything specific about it other than the fact that it's, you know, happens to be in a certain geography?
Oh, is there
a sensibility here?
Oh, you mean, is there an Irish sensibility that has expressed itself? I don't think so. This is a terrible thing to say.
Yeah.
This is a terrible thing to say, but I do not think so. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there are many movies being made in Ireland, some of them great ones. I have to say that the nearest thing I think there is to an Irish sensibility in film is Jim Sheridan's work, you know. Incredibly engaged, incredibly dramatic, you know, kind of straight off the streets. And that's where I see, if there was to be an Irish cinema aesthetic, which I don't share myself, I have to say. You know, my movies are fantastical. They're sometimes they're real, sometimes they're not, you know what I mean? But I think that's what it would be. But, I mean, if you think of Italian cinema, you know, you think of what defines British cinema, to me, is social realism, you know, and that is a language. It has an you know, an imagistic aesthetic to it, which you can define as things. I don't think there's the same equivalent in Ireland, and I don't know why. I think we might have arrived a little bit too late to the party, you know. But there are movies being made which are great, but the most successful of them, let's be honest, are ones that relate to an idea of Irishness that actually doesn't exist or never existed. You know, if you think of The Banshees of Inisherin, okay, which I thought was a really good film. I was amazed that Martin McDonagh, could extend what's a fascinating but tiny idea at such length, But the aesthetic of the whole thing is straight out of Paul Henry, you know. It is straight out of John Hind postcards. Which I'm not saying that's a fault with the movie. Actually, it's a very clever choice to be made. But that is the kind of aesthetic that people seem to lack. That seems to be the only kind of aesthetic that has established itself in what we would call Irish cinema, you know. Except I did see the, if you don't mind me digressing here for a bit, I saw that the Disney Fox version, the miniseries thing, Say Nothing, and I thought that was extraordinary. I thought, and it upset me because Stephen Ray is a really good friend of mine, and I would say I knew Dolar's Price myself, you know, but that had an energy and a realism to it that was absolutely extraordinary, and that to me seemed to be Irish cinema.
Yeah.
Can I say that? I don't know if many of you have seen it, but there were some episodes in it that were quite extraordinary, so dynamic, so kind of pulsing with energy, you know. And shall I shut up now?
No, I would fully agree with you. It is extraordinary, and it's the first time we've actually seen something that feels like a relatively realistic version of at least one side of the Troubles, you know, seen from the Republican side, with the complexity of it, you know, with the emotional complexity. It dares, it dares to get across the idea that actually for some people, young people who got sucked into it, it could also be incredibly exciting and, you know, lots of fun for a while until...
Yeah, there were parts of it that were like Goodfellas, weren't there? All my life I wanted to be a gangster. All my life I wanted to have an Armalite and shoot up Brits. I mean, come on. I mean, it's a repellent statement, but but I'm not even talking about what the thing was about. I'm just talking about the aesthetic that I saw in the piece of work and the way it was photographed. I mean, that can be my obsession as well. You know, I thought it was remarkable. I did, and I wrote to Patrick saying that actually. However much it's upset me because, you know, it must have upset those who are still alive and those families of the disappears. But you know, and it also nailed what horrible things were done in the name of something that seemed to have such a moral kind of high ground at the time, you know. That was extraordinary, I thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to shut up now, okay, sorry.
Oh, not at all. I think we want to bring in the audience in a minute, maybe, but could I just ask you one last thing, which is, it kind of follows from that in a way, which is, by and large, with the obvious exception of Michael Collins, you have written a kind of inner history of Ireland. I mean, going right back to Edward Fitzgerald, you know, the War of Independence is in the past. You've got the emergency so-called Second World War in Sunrise of Sea Monster. You know, you actually have written very coherently and consistently sort of Irish history. Yeah. And I was just wondering, is there another movie you would like to make using Irish history or drawing on it again?
Of course, yeah, but I mean, it's not, the cinematic climate at the moment is not one that would allow for that, you know. I mean, we would all love to see a movie about Roger Casement, wouldn't we, I'm sure, you know, and, you know, I'd love to be able to, people say to me, why don't you turn that book I wrote about Edward Fitzgerald into a movie? I would love, but there's nobody going to give me the money to do that. Nobody, believe me. Me or anybody else, I think, that those kind of films aren't made anymore, But the only reason I got to make Michael Collins was because I made Interview with the Vampire, and it made quite a lot of money for Warner Brothers,
Yeah.
And they allowed me a little skite.
Well, it was fascinating that you used your opportunity to make an Irish national epic rather than a Hollywood movie. So, should we...
Fintan, shall we open it up to
Yes.
the floor? Are there any questions? We have roving mics somewhere, I think. Raise your hand, please.
There's a gentleman here.
Okay. There's no sign of a microphone, so just speak loudly, please.
Yeah, talking about history, do you think the absence of support for historical films now will come from a generational disaffection? When I go to history lectures a lot in London about Irish topics, I'm going to one about Casement next week, and I find when I look around the audience, they're all my age group or older, so there's 60, 70-year-old, 80-year-old people, and it's not filled with people of my daughter's generation in their 20s.
Yeah. Well, you could say that about cinema in general, couldn't you? I mean, if you go to an art house cinema these days, it's full of people of our generation, isn't it? My sister's a painter. If you go to one of her exhibitions, everybody has grey hair. Maybe something's happening that we're not aware of. But I mean, I think you got to ask yourself, what is a historical movie, don't you? Really, was Abel Gance's Napoleon a historical movie? Was Ridley Scott's Napoleon a historical movie? Was Michael Collins a historical movie? I mean, what is Gladiator an historical movie? It's a very, very difficult. It's a very difficult term, but I mean, I think it's the claim to accurate historicity is the dangerous one. Do you understand what I mean?
Exactly.
The claim saying this is how things were. I mean, when I made Michael Collins, I really chose the template of a Warner Brother gangster movie of the 30s and 40s, really, because I felt I needed a genre to justify my own behavior, that kind of thing. But it's, I don't see. I mean, I suppose when Steven Spielberg made Lincoln, he was as accurate as he could be to a period in Lincoln's life and to a period where Lincoln decided to take action with the Civil War and all that sort of stuff. But it's a difficult term, and it's a difficult thing to do. I'm not sure movies are the best place to explore history or even to re-examine history, because it's too complex for a 90 or 2-hour minute experience in the theater,
Anybody else? Gentleman there.
What do you make of the Derry Girls?
I've seen 3 or 4 episodes of it. I thought, it's so terribly funny, and so terribly irreverent, and so terribly kind of unconscious of all the horrible aspects of the past. I found it absolutely refreshing, And many of the actresses in the Derry Girls are in Say Nothing as well, I mean, something obviously is happening that, that these subjects can be approached. I'm not saying with a sense of irreverence, but with a sense of that they are actually past in some way. Do you understand what I mean? Which I think is a good thing,
Any more questions? Gentleman here in the second row. Just wait for the mic, please. The mic has materialized.
What do you think it is about Ireland that has given rise to this extraordinary flowering of literary talent, not just both of you? Actually, this is a question to all 3 of you, really. Not just the 2 of you, but looking back through the last 100 and more years and now, for a relatively small country in Europe, Ireland has produced the extraordinary number of talented.
It's true, isn't it?
And I wonder why that is.
And still does.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, isn't it? I mean, if you think you're the voice of a generation, 2 months later, another voice of a generation will consign you to history. It's really frightening, actually. I would hate just to be an Irish writer. I really would. But there is, it's great. It's wonderful. You know, people could say it's because we have a distant memory of another language, perhaps. So there's Hiberno English has a certain energy to it that English doesn't have. I don't agree with that because I love reading the Finnish sentences, say, of, you know, can't think of Virginia Woolf or Graham Greene, you know what I mean? But it's, I mean, I myself think, I used to think, when I started making movies, I used to think, okay, why has there been no great Irish architecture? You know, why isn't there like a kind of a history of visual art that we could, you know, see a coherence to? Because putting a pen to paper was the cheapest thing imaginable, I suppose. Maybe we grew up in a poor country, you know, maybe that's part of it. But I don't know why you can't stop Irish people writing. You know, there hasn't even been a law against it, which would really give rise to a great flowering.
Well, they did try to ban most things, which was a great stimulus, you know. I mean, I think all of those things are true. I think there's also something, you know, around some of the things we've been talking about in a way, which is the gap between national narratives, you know. So it's a country for historic reasons which has these kind of big stories about itself, oppression and resistance and Catholicism and all those kind of things. So it has a kind of mythic structure, and there's a gap between that and lived experience, to go back to the horrible phrase that Neil was mentioning, you know, actual experience, you know, real, what people actually live. And I think where the imagination is sort of most at home is in that gap, you know, isn't it? There's a vacuum to be filled. Jonathan Swift is probably the first great Irish writer, really, certainly in the English language, you know, left his money to build a madhouse, one of the first mental hospitals in Europe, which is still there. And his last line was, he said in his poem, when he talks about giving, he says he showed with one satiric touch no nation needed it so much. And I think it's kind of true of Ireland as well, that it sort of needs the imaginative brilliance of its writers to sort of just fill the gaps between the stories it tells itself officially and the ones that we actually live through.
Yeah, but there is something happening. I mean, if you think of writers of the 50s and 60s, yeah, they lived in the wake of this huge oceanic kind of imaginations of Yeats and Joyce and Synge, you know, Casey, you know, and it seemed to go into a trough, didn't it? But there is something happening now that is incredibly rewarding, I think. I mean, I read a book like Milkman, yeah? And I go, where on earth did that come from? It's so extraordinary, you know? And I think part of what's happening, actually, is it used to be a male-dominated practice, you know? The Irish novelist, you know, drinking himself to death and writing works of strange genius. But there are so many female voices now that are the voice of Irish literature, I think. But it is kind of, I think there's something happening at the moment that is very unique and worthy of celebration, I think, you know.
And I think institutionally as well, there are a lot of supports in place that allow for a critical mass. So you have lots of books, and then some really excellent ones come to the fore.
Yeah.
Our library system is extraordinarily good.
Pardon?
Our library system, our public library system.
In Ireland?
It's really well resourced. It's continuing to buy books. It's continuing to employ
we're
staff.
in a great library here.
We're in a library here. And the Arts Council is funding a lot of individual writers, giving them generous supports. So I think all that helps. But it doesn't explain what's happening. There is an extraordinary confidence amongst young writers in particular. The right to fail, the right to experiment.
And there's a willingness to be provocative and to actually confront, you know, even with the idea of language, you know. Anyway, it's very gratifying, but I don't think we should compliment ourselves too much.
Yes, it might not last, and there are very good writers everywhere. So, as Paul Muldoon was saying last night, we don't have a monopoly on this at all. There's a lady there in the fourth row.
Thank you. You talked about like memories of what people live through.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously, we all have slightly different memories of what we've lived through. And so I'm wondering, I don't know, do you have siblings? And if not siblings, do you have cousins? And how do they remember what you all lived through, and
Okay.
and what conversations have you had about that?
Okay. Well, no. I mean, when I wrote this memoir, I wasn't claiming to accuracy of memory at all. It was my own particular memories, really. I did send it to my sisters and my brothers, expecting to be given out to. I was only given out to by one person. I'm not going to tell you who it is. Somebody said to me, "I speed read your book, and I can't believe there's no mention of me whatsoever in it." I went, "What?" I swear to God. She was not Irish, by the way. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. But who tells you I speed read your book? What does that even mean? Or skim read was the word, I think, or something like that. But no, I wasn't given out to. But I think their memories would obviously be different. Of course, they would be.
It's a very delicate business, and it's a great question. I realized that I didn't, I wasn't conscious of this, but when I was doing my own book, and after I'd done it, I only realized I could only have written this book after my parents had died. Oh. Even though there's nothing but sort of love and affection for my parents in it, like there's nothing. They were terrific. There's no dark secrets or anything. But it does speak about my father's life, and it does say, the kind of cruelty that he experienced as a kid and that kind of stuff. I think if I had felt them looking over my shoulder more, I probably wouldn't have been able to write the thing, But again, I wasn't so conscious of that. But I do think you have to, maybe when your parents have died, your life becomes your own property. So you're nobody's child anymore, and therefore it's okay. Well, this is mine now. I can write about it, But
and what bus route did your father work on?
So he ended up mostly on the 11 buses, the number 11.
He never did the 30, no?
He never did the 30, unfortunately. No, he didn't go north side. He was based in Donnybrook.
Yeah.
He used to go out the south side, where his greatest moment in his life occurred, where he was, there was a bus, I think 52 or something, used to go up the foothills of the Dublin Mountains, and he was doing it really early in the morning, and he looked out the door, the back door of the bus, and there were I think 6 very large African American men in white tracksuits running up the hill. Now, like, nobody in Ireland ran. They certainly didn't have white tracksuits, and they were not people of color. And one of them he saw was Muhammad Ali, who was running up the hill. And so this was the person my father loved most in the entire world, was Muhammad Ali. He stopped the bus and offered Ali a lift. And Ali said, "Oh God, I got this fight to do. I got to do this work, But he got on the bus, and I always think in my head, you can imagine sort of sleepy, probably smoky, early morning grey Dublin bus, and Muhammad Ali getting in a white tracksuit, and going around and talking to everybody. So everybody had stories that at least moments in their lives that were extraordinary, even if their lives in general were ordinary.
So I have a question for both of you. Was it cathartic? Did you feel better when you'd finished writing your memoirs? Or do you think you'd write more memoirs?
For me?
Yeah, both of you.
It was cathartic that people were interested in it, actually. It really was, yeah. And for me, it was lovely to get back to the simplicity of ordinary description. Do you understand what I mean? Of ordinary, the rhythm of an ordinary sentence. I really did love doing that. And I really appreciated that people seemed to like it, too.
It's glorious. I mean,
well, thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure I'd write another one.
People talk about slow cooking. This requires slow reading. I sort of don't want it to end. I want to go back and read paragraphs a second time because it's so lyrical. It's really beautiful. Thanks. Fintan, I have a quick question for you, and then we probably need to wind it up. So if anybody has one last question, I'll take it in a minute. But my question to you, Fintan, is slightly off topic. I saw that you spoke about probably what helped Ireland get out of the morasses of the 1950s and 60s was a capacity for plurality, multiplicity and the fact that so many people emigrated and remained Irish and were able to cope with that duality of identity. What's going to happen now? Have we been saved, or are we headed into very murky waters? And what might save us in the future? That's 3 questions in one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing we understand, you know, is that we have economically become one of the most globalized societies in the world. You know, we are hugely exposed to the American economy. It's just worth, I don't want to use statistics, but there's just one is like, so there's more American multinational investment in Ireland. Well, if you take the stock of investments in Ireland from America, it's 3 times the entire stock of American investments in China and India put together.
Wow.
China and India are slightly larger than Ireland, you know. So the scale of this thing is extraordinary, and we don't really know it. We find it hard to grasp what's happening with it. Where's all the money coming from? And we're being showered with corporation taxes, and we don't know what to do with them because we haven't kind of created it ourselves. And so we're very, very exposed to you know, everything that's going on, the whole crisis of democracy, the whole crisis of globalization. So we're the big winners of globalization, and globalization is going into reverse at the moment, right? So what story are we going to tell ourselves in relation to all of that? I'm still fairly optimistic, actually, for the reasons that you were mentioning. You know, actually, we have a very, very deep reservoir of collective experience of dealing with complexity, simply because of mass emigration, right? So, you know, we are a people who learned how to go from a tiny farm in Mayo to, you know, New York, you know, straight, and to make a life and to be yourself and find a foothold, and still be Irish, still hold something about your past and your sense of values. So we've been through extraordinary transformations before, and you just hope that we have enough resilience with all of that to not succumb to kind of stupid, toxic nostalgia about the past. You know, the surveys tell us that the 2 least nostalgic peoples in the world at the moment are the Chinese, who don't really look back fondly on the Cultural Revolution and all that, and mass starvation, and the Irish, who don't really look back all that fondly on the 1950s or the 1940s, you know. So we have that, you know, like make Ireland great again is never really going to be a slogan that's going to work. So I'm sort of hopeful that we have enough there to be able to weather this kind of current crisis.
Thank you. So time for one last question. And if we don't have any questions, I think all that remains for me to do is to thank Fintan for moderating this event so expertly and brilliantly.
Thank you very much.
And to thank our guest, Will Gordon, whose latest book, and he's been writing books and winning prizes since, I think, 1979. Is it the Guardian Fiction Prize for A Night in Tunisia? His latest book deserves to win all the prizes going. It's an absolutely glorious read. And Neil will be in the room outside, available to sign books in the next few minutes. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil Gordon.
Thank you very much.